Last Friday, I was in London and I went to see my first West End show, We Will Rock You, which is a musical based around some of the biggest hits from Queen. The show is coming to Dublin in April next year, and I can tell you it is 3 hours of madness. It's an assault on the senses. You'll find yourself singing along even if you don't want to. But how can you not with songs like this?
Another one bites the dust. Oh, yes. Another one bites the dust. And another one gone. And another one gone. Another one bites the dust.
All we hear is radio gaga, video goo, internet gaga. All we hear is cyberspace gaga, marketing gaga. Somebody, please anybody find me somebody to love.
But you're a young man, hard man, shouting in the street, gonna take on the world someday. You got blood on your face, you're big in disgrace, waving your banner all over the place, yeah. We will rock you.
Yes, there is only one Queen. And you know what? It's brash and it's loud and it's a little bit cheesy, but it's all quite fun. And before I watched the musical, I had a chance to talk to its writer and director, comedian Ben Elton. And I started by confessing that it was my first West End experience.
Well, I'm deeply flattered to be a part of it, and may I say, you've scrubbed up very well. That's all I can say.
Yes, you're admiring my shoes.
I am. A beautiful pair of glittering wedges. I think Freddie would have loved them.
Actually, well, speaking of Freddie, it was Saturday marked the 21st anniversary of his death. How do you remember him? First of all, did you actually ever meet him?
I met him across a room. During my brief period of being a sort of hip news celebrity, during the sort of young ones period, Rick Mail and I got a invitation to a Queen party. Yes, one of those legendary ones. It was at Kensington Roof Gardens, and yes, there were naked, body-painted lift attendants. How exciting was that, I can assure you. And we went. It wasn't very decadent, it was just very jolly. And I didn't know Freddie, and of course everyone was looking at him, and he was sat there quietly with his family, as he was a very quiet man in many ways. It was only on stage that he became this wonderful force. And he caught my eye, and he raised his glass and he nodded at me, and I can still see him to this very day. That's the closest I ever got to Freddie Mercury, except I've got very close to him because I've worked with his spiritual brothers. I've worked with the three men with whom he shared his entire adult life, his artistic life, Brian, Roger and John. And I've come to know Freddie well through them because they live with their friendship and their partnership with him every day.
If you were to go back and, you know, say to your 20-year-old self that you were going to write a hugely successful musical, one of the longest running in the West End, how do you think you would have responded?
Well, I'd have been absolutely thrilled, of course, but particularly I would have thought, well, getting a hit like that would surprise me, but being involved in musical theatre even then wouldn't, because I'd written 3 musicals when I was at university. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, you were some edgy stand-up comic. How come you ended up in the world of musical theatre? Actually, I've always loved musical theatre. I saw Grease in this very theatre, the Dominion, where we're sitting. I saw it in 1972. I just thought it was the best experience I'd ever seen on stage. I played the Artful Dodger in Am Dram when I was a youngster. I love musical theatre. I've always loved it.
Actually,
You played the Artful Dodger?
My all-girls convent school.
Ah, we had a female Oliver in a sort of boy's wig. So look, if I would have asked that question, I would actually say, oh gosh, I'm glad I got into musical theatre because I love it. But to get a hit like that, well, you can't plan for it. You just got to be very pleased when it happens.
Talk to us about the input that the rest of the band has had throughout the years with the show.
Well, Brian and Roger are very, very close involved. They're hands-on. I mean, they're perhaps not quite as daily as me because I'm the actual director, but they're the musical directors, and every musician who plays in We Will Rock You has been auditioned and vetted and worked with Brian and Roger, just as all the casting. They involve themselves. This tour that we're discussing now was personally cast by Brian, Roger and myself. Obviously, the initial stages are done by our associates, but when it comes to the final 2 days of casting, Brian, Roger and myself sat in this very theatre and chose the company that will be going to Ireland to entertain you. So they're very closely involved. John is much more at a distance, John Deacon. He doesn't get about so much, that's his choice, but he is entirely approving. And when we put this show together 10, 11 years ago, I met him 3 times. He wrote me his notes, he told me how much he loved what I was doing, and he gave me the thumbs up, and that was John's involvement. So all three of them, but in terms of direct personal involvement, Brian and Roger, if not on a day-to-day basis, I can assure you on a month-by-month basis for the last 11 years.
You're living in Australia, so you're sort of back in these waters, and you were doing the Prince's Trust recently. How did that go for you?
Well, it was terrific. I mean, we're based currently in Australia. My wife's Australian, and she has a large and wonderful family, and we had to make quite a difficult decision in terms of my career, because if we didn't go and base ourselves there for a few years, our children would never have known their Australian family, grandparents, aunts, uncles. So that's why I'm in Australia, and I love it, and it's marvellous. But as I say, it's a family decision. I work in Britain and in Australia and all over the world, so I travel a fair bit. Yeah, we did this benefit. I was fortunate. The Prince's Trust is a great charity. Whatever your ideas about monarchy are, you can't argue with this charity, which is specifically about reaching marginalised young people. And yeah, it was exciting. I wrote a new sketch for Blackadder, which was something unique, and I hosted the show and just generally assembled it for them. Because when you put a benefit together, you need somebody to write the letters and to commit themselves. And I was that mug on this occasion, and it was very, very, very inspiring.
I suppose years ago people would never have thought that you would be performing at the Prince's Trust. I mean, have your views of the monarchy mellowed?
No, they didn't need to mellow, because I've never seen them as the enemy at all. When people used to say, I presumed you'd be a Republican, I'd say, look, if you want to talk about who's running this country, you need to look at the banks, you need to look at the cultural hegemony of the United States. Not that that's entirely anybody's fault, but basically the idea that the monarchy are of any political relevance, to me, is absurd, and it was 30 years ago. I think it's a clear anachronism. It's clearly the silliest way you could possibly choose a head of state, and yet it seems to work rather well, because we've got this benign lady who, frankly, doesn't do anybody any harm. So, for me, I've never been interested in the Republican or the monarchist debate. So I think it's largely an irrelevance. My politics are welfare state Labour, and I believe the real enemy is unfettered international capitalism and unregulated markets. And if you want to talk about who's running the country, don't look at the head on the back of the coin. Look at the people who are sorting the coins out for their own benefit, and they're not paying any bloody tax on it. So that's where I stand on whether or not I do anything for the Prince's Trust. It's a great charity. I'm doing something for Crisis next week. I'm hosting a gig with Paul Weller at the top of the bill at Hammersmith Odeon. I don't choose what kids I like to help. I just try and make what time I've got.
Alrighty. Are you still a supporter of the Labour Party?
I would definitely. Not always. I don't believe I'm not a politician, but my politics remain Attleite, Bevanite. I am a welfare state. I'm a welfare state Labour man. I believe socialism is actually about controlled economies, so I wouldn't call myself a socialist. But then I don't think the Labour Party's ever been socialist. I don't think. I think it's more a question of liberal Democrat with a small L and a small D.
Have you been following the Leveson inquiry?
Following it? I mean, I'm aware. Yeah, I mean, not in any great. Yeah, I mean, as much as anyone reading the newspapers and yes.
But did you have any friends that were directly involved in the inquiry itself?
I think we're all directly involved in what was a complete, transparent collapse of standards within the press. No, I haven't been doorstepped and I haven't been phone tapped, but I am aware that if I live in a country where the Prime Minister is hand in hand with editors of newspapers, I think we need to do something about it. So yeah, we're all directly involved in what I believe has been an absolute collapse of ethical standards and journalistic standards and editorial standards. One thing I would say is I find it extraordinary the way people seem to think that because a celebrity's been insulted, that suddenly it means is less significant. You know, obviously when it comes to little girls and people have been murdered, that's obviously much, much more important. But I do find I resent the fact that somebody like Hugh Grant, oh, poor him. You know, why shouldn't his private life be lied about and his family traduced? He's a celebrity, why not? I think that's outrageous. I think all human beings are deserving of respect, and I don't think the press have shown enough of it. And I'm glad that they're having to answer for themselves. They're not the only villains. We've all, you know, we all need to look. You point a finger, there's three fingers pointing back.
The Two Brothers is your latest book, and just even reading about it, your passion for it really comes through. The fact that it became such an obsession for you.
I put my heart and soul into every piece of work I do because you owe that to the audience, whether it's one reader or 2,000 people saying We Will Rock You. Certainly Two Brothers was a particular passion for me, not just because of the moderate family connection, in that it's inspired by the fact that I come from a family that had people involved on both sides in the Second World War. It's passionate for me because I love history above all recreations. I don't read a lot of novels. I read history books. I've always read history books. And so to write a historical novel is a particular pleasure. The story is pure fiction. As I'm the son of a refugee, which is why I feel very passionately about respect for refugees in this day and age. I certainly wouldn't be alive if Britain hadn't allowed a place and a safety to my father, who was escaping a political tyranny in another country, and we still have those issues to this very day. So I feel very passionately involved about that, but the story is not personal. The story is a fiction based on my knowledge of history.
All right, so that was comedian Ben Elton, who's writer and director of We Will Rock You, that I got to meet before the show. And then after the show, we were standing around, and who walks into the room? Only Queen's drummer, the great legendary Roger Taylor. So I sidled up to him and asked him what Freddie would have thought of the show.
I'm pretty sure he would have loved this. He's a very theatrical man. There's another room over the other side of this theatre, which is with an actual picture of him and Cliff Richard on stage in this theatre, in a musical called Time. And he just did a one-off, you know. He came and sang a couple of songs, but he was on the album. So he obviously loved this kind of thing. He loved it more than I do. I'm going to be honest with you.
What's it like when you are involved in a show like this? Because it's not just a show that Ben wrote, as he was explaining to me earlier. Like, you guys are involved.
Well, it is great to have that input. So many people don't have that control, you know, over their the work that they did before. So we like to have some kind of quality control and to make sure that our music is heard in a way that we think is good. I mean, I don't think the musical can always cover all those bases. We Will Rock is not a concert. It is a musical. Not always been my favourite genre, but that's just me.
That was Queen's Roger Taylor there, and We Will Rock You is coming to Dublin's O2 in April 2013. For more information, you can go to wewillrockyou.co.uk.